one of the things that I've come to understand about political arguments is, well, people say, well, the person on the other side of the ideological continuum has different opinions than I do. It's like, no, they don't. Or maybe they do. But they don't see the same facts. Because the filter they use to select from among the infinite number of available facts preferentially presents them with the facts that are relevant to them. And that's already built into their ethic. And so one of the horrible things about political discussions is that you're actually having a discussion about what the facts are. And you say, well, the facts are the same for everyone. It's like, yeah. It's like saying, I have an infinite library of books, and you can come into it. It's like, well, you're going to pick out the same book? It seems highly improbable. And that's the problem with facts. It's like, there's a lot of them. You know, you try to do something like untangle the Israel-Palestine conflict. I mean, one of the things you just to start with is like, okay, how far back are you going to go? Well, I would say it depends on what argument you want to make. You know, if you want to make argument A, you go back 100 years. If you want to make argument B, you go back 3,000 years. And then you could have an argument about which time scale you should use, but it's not like it's obvious. You know, is it 10 years? Is it 1 year? Is it 6 months? Like, it's not 3,000 years. Is it 2,999 years? Like, where are the borders of relevancy when you're laying out the landscape of the argument? God only knows. It's intractable. And you know, partly the way your temperament solves that problem, because it does is say, well, a creature like you with your temperament preferentially attends to this set of facts. And that'll work, because attending to that sort of facts is likely to produce a reasonable outcome for you in most circumstances. And it's a way that you simplify the world and make a tremendous amount of it irrelevant. A priori filters. Okay, good. Now, the next cool thing. What happens when you see a tool? You're happy. What happens when you see an obstacle? You're unhappy. And now you understand emotions. And that's so, that doesn't take much. That's, once you've got this initial framework, it's like, okay, well, what's an emotion for? Positive. Move forward. Negative. Get away. Indeterminate. Stop. That's anxiety. Stop. You're not where you think you are. Your map isn't producing the desired outcome. It's wrong. What should you do? You don't know. Stop. Because if you don't know where to go, there's no point going anywhere. And then what? Prepare. That's anxiety. Stop. Prepare. Well, people hate that because, well, for obvious reasons. Prepare. For what? Everything. Yeah. Very, very demanding psychophysiologically. And that's also something that's really worth knowing. It's like anxiety isn't just a psychological state that's unpleasant. It's like you're revved up and you're burning resources like mad. And you're in a biochemical state such that's optimized for quick action, but that's toxic if you inhabit it for any length of time. So not knowing what to do, that is not good. And it isn't just that it makes you feel bad. It hurts you, it damages you, it can kill you. It'll make you age, it'll make you fat, it'll give you diabetes, it'll suppress your immune system so you're more likely to develop cancer. It'll damage your brain, your hippocampus. It'll increase the probability that you have Alzheimer's. It's like, it's no joke that. It's you're running your machinery faster than you can replenish it. So it's not a state that you can be in. It's not a state you can tolerate because it's anxiety. It's anxious. But it's also not a state you can live in. And so, I don't know where I am means everything's relevant, and I have to ramp up my capacity for action to deal with that. Bad. People do not like that. We do not like not to be where we think we are. We really, really, really don't like that. And we structure almost all of our environments constantly so that never happens. You know, we're all dressed the same with tiny, tiny variations, you know. We all follow the same traffic laws. Everybody's behaving according to the proper code in this room, and everyone in this building is doing the same thing. It's like we're doing everything we can to make sure that everyone knows exactly where they are and what they're doing all the time. And that's because when we're in that state, we can advance cautiously using positive things and maintain a modicum of positive emotion. That's what we're basically trying to do. Okay, so you want to set up your world so that You're surrounded by things that move you along your way, that obstacles are minimized, and that almost everything can be ignored. Okay, so emotion. Positive emotion, that's dopaminergic. That's incentive reward. You experience it in relationship to a goal. Because, you know, most of the time when you talk to behavioral psychologists, they'll tell you reward is a satiation consequence. You're hungry, you get a piece of food, that's rewarding. It's like, that's consumatory reward. And that shuts down the motivational system. It's satiating, it makes you satisfied. That's not the same as incentive reward. Incentive reward says, come this way, good things are over here, good things are over here. And that's dopaminergic. And that's the kind of reward people really like. We live for that. So when you talk about positive meaning in your life, this is an oversimplification, but a tremendous amount of that is incentive reward. You're in a goal-directed structure, it's a value structure, let's say it's fairly well developed because you're sophisticated. Everything you do is linked to something else. You move ahead, it works, yes. You move ahead, it works, yes. And it's that constant moving ahead and the validation of the frame that makes your life meaningful. And so that also means no value system, no positive emotion, which is another thing that's so much worth knowing. You know, the postmodernists complain about value systems constantly, and they say, well, the problem with a value system is that it includes some people, winners, and excludes other people, losers. It's like, yes, that's true. What's the answer? Flatten the value system. It's like, so there's no losers. Fine, no winners either. And if the value system is flat, there's no point B, what the hell are you going to do? Where's your positive emotion? You got nothing to, you're going to wander around being happy that the value system is flat. It's like, no, you're not. Because when you flatten out value systems, you don't get rid of suffering, because you can't. All you get rid of is the possibility of positive emotion. And that is not a good solution. So then you leave people with nothing but negative emotion. It's so naive. Okay, so good. So now we know. You're going from point A to point B. You're doing that with an action. If things are working out, if you see facilitators along the way that you can utilize, you get a kick of positive emotion. You know, and you can even see that calibrated. Like, let's say you do better than expected on a test. Go, yes! It's like, that's better than doing as well as you expected. Because what the message is that not only am I moving towards my desired goal, but I'm moving along faster and with less effort than I thought. It's like, bang! Positive reinforcement. Right? And you think, yes! Well, that's it. That's meaning. That's a big chunk of meaning. And so, a really meaningful event is one that gets you to the next step and simultaneously increases the probability that you're going to get to all the steps after that. That's like a maximally meaningful event. So, you know, you get, you're opening an envelope about whether or not you got into medical school. It's like you're going like this, right? Why? Why are you shaking? It's an envelope. No, it's not. It's a portal, right? It's a portal. And what's in that envelope either puts you that way into one world or that way into another. And you think, you're looking at it, you think, well, that's an envelope. It's like your body isn't thinking that, not for a bloody second. It knows perfectly well that that's a portal. And you open it up, it's like collapse. The whole, what would you call it? That whole avatar-related future just goes ashes. Or, bang, it springs into reality. And you perceive that, and that you perceive all of that almost instantaneously, and that produces that radical transformation in emotion. You're not reacting to the envelope, or maybe the envelope isn't what you think it is, or maybe the envelope isn't what you see, and that's more accurate. That's way more accurate. The envelope is way more than what you see. Okay, good. Let's break for 15 minutes, okay? And then we'll go ahead with the next part of this. Well, so that's just a transformation of the previous diagram. While you're moving around along from what is to what should be, we'll say, as long as things are working out, well then you're mildly happy, and if they don't work out, well then that's another problem. You see, these are different sizes. There's a reason for that, and that's because negative emotion has more potency unit for unit than positive emotion does. And so what that means is that people are more reactive. People hate a small loss more than they like an equivalent gain. And so we're tilted to some degree towards a bias for negative emotion. And that is also dependent on temperament, because somebody who's very, very low in neuroticism, that's basically anxiety and emotional pain susceptibility, something like that. So that would be the threshold for experiencing a certain level of anxiety or emotional pain, but also the length of time that would take to recover. It's something like that. And so, but for the standard human being, loss hurts more than gain rewards. And so, well, it's useful to know that, because it helps you understand yourself and other human beings. Even if you're trying to motivate someone to do something, loss avoidance is often a powerful motivation as well as gain. So, all right, prevention, fundamentally. Okay, so now here's another way of thinking about this. And this is a more abstract way of thinking about it. So we talked about the idea that the world might be divided into tools and obstacles and irrelevant things, most of which, and irrelevant things, that's a huge category, and it's the one you don't want to have disrupted. And also that the obstacle category produces more emotion than the tool category. But here's another way of thinking about it. And this is thinking about it more from a purely emotional perspective. When you think about the world as tools, it's dead practical, and it's sort of grounded in the idea of motor usage in some sense. But you can think in an analogical fashion about the same system in a slightly different manner. You're in the situation that you're in right now, and that's not good enough. And so that's another thing that's kind of interesting about people, is they're chronically dissatisfied with the way things are. Well, that's okay, because you wouldn't be motivated to move forward if you weren't chronically dissatisfied with the way that things are. But it's kind of annoying, you know, because you might think, well, why aren't you just happy with what you have? And the answer to that is generally, because I don't know if it's going to last. And so that's part of it. And the other is, well, if the situation shifted a bit, maybe I'd have more options. And some of that would be, it would last longer, it'd be more stable, it'd be more promising. And so you can say, well, you should be satisfied with what you have, but it's kind of really a stupid thing in some sense to tell human beings, because no matter what you have, it isn't going to solve your fundamental problem. So the problem isn't going away, and you can't just fool yourself into saying, well, what I have is great. You could say, I could have a hell of a lot less, and that would be bad, and most people have a lot less than me, and I should be grateful for what I have. That's fine, that's perfectly reasonable. But you're stuck in this, you're stuck with this chronic sense of unfinished business, and the reason for that is, well, you're permanently vulnerable, so how else would you, how could it be otherwise? And even if you've got your problem solved, then there's 3 or 4 people in your family that by no means have got their problem solved. So the problem of problems never goes away. That's an that's a good thing to know existentially too, because it helps you calibrate your life properly. Because you might be thinking, well, if I just got everything together, you know, I'd hit some plateau of satiation and stability, and then I would just be there. It's like, no, that's never going to happen. It's never going to happen. So you might as well just forget about that. What you can, it's a Sisyphus issue, you know, the guy who pushes the rock up the road and up the hill and it rolls back down. I think it was Nietzsche who said we must presume Sisyphus to be happy, something like that. Well, maybe you want to push your damn rock up a hill, you know, it's going to roll down again. It's like, what are you going to do, just sit there by the rock? It's okay to be active, even if the problem you're trying to solve is not fundamentally solvable. That doesn't mean it isn't worth trying to solve. And so, you know, I treat people who have post-traumatic disorder or symptoms of post-traumatic disorder. And so let's say they got post-traumatic stress disorder because a relationship collapsed on them suddenly, which is quite common. You know, they get betrayed or someone leaves them suddenly, and then they don't know what to do, because, especially if they're conscientious, because then they just tear themselves into pieces trying to figure out what they did wrong to bring about that event. And the reason they're doing that is because they want to retool their perceptions and their actions so that the probability that they'll have the same experience again is minimized. And their mind won't leave them alone till they do it. And no wonder, right? Because if you fall into a big pit and you get really hurt, the first thing you should figure out is how to not fall into big pits anymore. And your mind is set up exactly for that. And so what you do with someone who's having problems like that, so maybe they're waking up at the middle of the night obsessing about what went wrong, is you walk them through it. You do a situational analysis first, because one of the oversimplifications that people make, and this is especially true for conscientious people, is if something bad happened to me, I must have done something to deserve it. Now that's actually a pretty functional idea, because it suggests that there are things about your behavior that you could change that would make the future better. But the problem is that, say if it's the collapse of a relationship and you've been with that person for 8 years or longer, well, you did so many things with them that the idea that you did something wrong pretty much extends to every single thing you ever did with them. And that's, how are you going to fix that? And so that's part of the trauma, actually. The trauma is 80 million snakes all at the same time. It's like, well, forget it. You don't have time to go through all that material. And so partly what you do is with people, and this is what you should do with yourself too, is you do a situational analysis. It's like, don't be assuming necessarily that the thing that happened to you only happened to you because of what you did or didn't do. There's all sorts of factors at play. So one of the things that sometimes I do with clients is, if they were in a relationship and I can get some reasonable personality information about both of them, I can point out where they were temperamentally incompatible. You know, like if you're a highly conscientious person and your partner is very, very low in conscientiousness, it's like, well, good luck to you two. How the hell are you ever going to work that out? Because you want everything to be exactly where it's supposed to be, and you're working all the time, and your partner could care less whether things were where they're supposed to be, and they're not going to work. And you can butt heads about that forever. The probability that you're going to shift it, you know, except to some minor degree, is very, very low. And so sometimes you end up with someone with whom you get along very well on one temperamental dimension, and you're an absolute catastrophe on the other 4. And the probability that you're going to be able to mediate a huge temperamental difference is extremely low. You wouldn't expect yourself to mediate a huge intellectual difference, right? You're going to make the other person smarter, or maybe you smarter, depending on who you're with. It's like, no, probably not. A bit, maybe. So you do a situational analysis. And so what you're trying to do is to extract out information from your past and your present that will enable you to conduct yourself properly into the future. And so that's another example of the pragmatic element of thought. Well then, within the brain itself, apart from the major subdivisions which we just described, there are minor subdivisions, and here's a bunch of them listed: the caudate nucleus, the cerebral cortex, the huge newest part of the brain that's about a square meter. If you unfold it, it's all folded up, and most of the processing occurs right on the surface. That's the idea anyways. The thalamus, that's a place where a lot of the information in the brain appears to be integrated. The cerebellum helps you with balance and the sequencing of complex motor activities. The hippocampus, that's the one we talked about before. One of the things that the hippocampus seems to do is compare your model of the world as it's unfolding with the model that you desire to be occurring, and then keeps track of mismatches. And if it detects a mismatch, then it disinhibits other emotional and motivational centers. And that's the beginning of your response to the unknown. So one of them is the hypothalamus. I'm going to concentrate on it for a bit. It's a little tiny part of the brain that's pretty much at the top of the spinal cord. See, it's really small compared to the rest of the brain. Now, it turns out that imagine this is a cat brain for a minute, and you take off the whole cat brain, except for the hypothalamus, which people do. You take off the whole cortex, for example, and then the cat's still alive if you do it carefully, but it doesn't have much of a brain, and so you might think, well, that cat would just do nothing, but cat's actually pretty functional if it's reduced just to its hypothalamus. And that's because the hypothalamus is an incredibly important part of the brain, and it provides what I would say constitute the major frames, the major psychological frames. And so like a decorticate cat can still eat and drink and regulate its body temperature and engage in defensive aggression, and if it's female it can still mate. Male can't, because the male mating behavior is more complicated. And as long as you keep it in a bounded environment, it can function reasonably well. It's hyper curious though. which is very weird because you wouldn't expect a cat with no brain to be curious about anything, but a cat with no brain is curious about everything. And that seems to be because part of the reason that you aren't curious about something anymore is because you've investigated it and you've built a representation of it that's functional, and that functional representation then stands for the thing itself, and then you can ignore it. And so you learn to ignore things. They're interesting to begin with, and then you learn to ignore them. And so one of the things that I think artists do, if they're great artists, is remind you that there's more to things than you see now that you've learned to ignore them. So you get a kind of a hallucinogenic painting of flowers like Van Gogh might produce, like his famous irises, which I think sold for like $220 million or something outrageous. It's like what Van Gogh is trying to show you is what those flowers looked like before you thought you could see them, because now you flower and you walk by, you know. You don't see it at all because you're off to get a peanut butter sandwich or something. You don't have time to glory in the wonder of the world, you know. You've got something practical to do. So, all right, so we're going to zoom in on the hypothalamus here. And what you see, of course, when you zoom in on the hypothalamus is that it's not a thing. It's a whole bunch of things, and then it's one of those horrible whole bunches of things that are made out of even more bunches of things, and they're made out of more bunches of things. And what's really interesting about going down the body from an analytic perspective is it doesn't seem to get less complex as you go farther down, you know. Like some of the, I should actually show you that. I haven't showed you that little video of DNA fixing itself, eh? Oh, I better show you that. It's so cool. It's ridiculously cool, so you definitely need to see it. So like that's just so ridiculously mind-blowing that it's almost unbearable. I mean, to think about that as clockwork even is a pretty strange idea, because well, those little things walk over obstacles. It's like, how the hell does that happen? They're just molecules. So it's so cool because when you go down you'd think simple, but you know. And you know, he said at the beginning when they were taking that, when the little machines were taking that DNA apart, that he didn't show the error correcting. You know, there's other little machines that go along and see if everything's okay, and if it isn't, they cut it out and put a right piece in. It's like, yeah, things we don't understand. There's no shortage of them, that's for sure. Okay, so what I'm doing in some sense is walking you through a psychophysiological or representation of Piaget's developmental process, I would say. So I wanted to zero in on the hypothalamus because it seems to me the thing that sets the most basic frames. And so we'll go ahead with that. So you see that it's made up of all these little parts. And so it's called the hypothalamus more for convenience than because it's a homogeneous set of structures, because it's not a homogeneous set of structures. And this is something to consider very carefully when you're thinking about the terminology that psychologists use or that you might use to describe your own behavior. Because you know, you can roughly, there is a psychology of motivation and there's a psychology of emotion, and you might think, well, emotion and motivation are categorically different entities, but they're not. In fact, there's no such thing as a uniform set of motivations, and there's no such thing as a uniform set of emotions, and the distinction between a motivation and an emotion is unclear, to say the least. And that's partly because the physiological substructures that subsume what we call motivations and what we call emotions, and it's not like there's a motivation center that's homogeneous. The closest is the hypothalamus, but it's made of structures that are qualitatively different. And then the emotions, because I have to use that descriptive terminology because we have to communicate about it somehow, there's all sorts of different structures in the brain that contribute to emotional expression, and they're not even in the same place, much less composed of identical structure or function. So you know, we have these shorthands that we use to divide up the world, but they're awkward and untenable as the level of resolution increases. But anyways, I'm still going to go with motivation and emotion because it's a useful simplification. But you can see with the hypothalamus that there's all these, you know, complicated little subsystems in there. And then I showed you that video to show you just how complicated the subsystems are, all the way down to the, really to the molecular level. How those little machines manage what they do is completely beyond me. You know, to call it clockwork when those little things that walk can walk over obstacles. It's like clockwork does one thing, you know, only. Click, 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 that's all it does. No exceptions. This thing walks over obstacles to get where it's going. It's like, who knows what's going on down there. But it works well enough, so here we are, weirdly enough.